I think that as a society, we systematically neglect the experience that educators are having. If you're at a tech company, you're getting a pulse survey every 10 minutes about like, how you doing? How can we make your experience better? In education, we look at the lagging indicator of people leaving the building and leaving the profession. And we need to be more attentive. We need to listen more carefully to educators.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
Hi, everybody. This is Union Talk, and I'm Randi Weingarten. And I love talking about education, public education, and school teachers. So teachers have always had an incredibly important role in America. And in American life, I would actually argue teachers have an important role around the world. They are the connection for kids to learning about, being interested in, seizing their futures. But since the pandemic, educators have played even more of an important role. There was a minute or two that as schools closed at the beginning of the pandemic and nobody knew what was going on, and teachers became a lifeline. They MacGyvered everything. They figured out, how to do remote, how to connect with people, how to do it asynchronistically, synchronistically. They were basically thought of as heroes for our kids. And then, after a little while, what we saw is some of the same division that we see in America, unfortunately, right now, which is the vilification of teachers, which is when people are scared about what life might bring. They're characterized as villains and groomers and, bent on destroying what they spend their lives creating, which is the fabric of America and helping kids learn and thrive. But every single one of these teachers who I'm talking about, who go through all of this, and many of whom doing it without getting paid enough and not having the right conditions and having to deal with every social issue on their doorstep because it comes in packages of children. They are the ones who every single day are trying to make the world a better place. And what a shock. One of the things that we have seen in the last couple of years, even more than before, is this sense of people just saying, oh my God, I give up, or I'm burnt out, or is everything going to be on my shoulders? And, I could go through stat after stat, but let me just say this. Burnout is not inevitable. And the way, what I'm excited about, the rest of what we're talking about today is that the AFT and educators thriving have actually worked together to find ways, data-based, to turn this around through strategies that reduce stress, improve well-being, and support teachers and school staff so they don't feel like they need to leave the profession and the students they love. So this fall, we released a report called Beyond Burnout, which identifies research-based solutions to improve the chronic levels of stress and burnout affecting educators. And it shows what can happen when these solutions are put into practice. And for those of you who don't, say, is this really an issue? Look, more 2/3 of educators have said to us this is an issue, far more than any other profession in the country. So these guests that I have today, they're not going to simply talk about what's wrong. They're going to tell you the problem solving that they and others have done. And that's why I'm so grateful to have them. Educators Thriving did a whole bunch of work with us. They generated a gauge of well-being. They worked in partnership with a lot of AFT affiliates. They talked to more than, or the affiliates that they work with involved more than 1,300 educators in a pilot survey. And we found really good ways and strategies, if people work collaboratively, to say, we can actually change this. And so we move from identifying the issues to actually doing something about the issues. And that's what you're going to hear a little bit about. But this is the stat, before I introduce people, this is the stat that just blows my mind. So we had from 88% people basically saying, I'm really exhausted. We need to, I don't know what to do, to after the work we did, 93% of the participants believed that the work, the strategies that are in this Beyond Burnout report, believed that those strategies made their job feel more sustainable, and 94% said it helped improve well-being. So that's why I wanted Tyler Hester, who's the founder of Educators Thriving, and Amy Such, who's a school psychologist at Joseph Gallagher Elementary School in Chicago, to actually be with us and talk to us about this, because they are leading the way in problem solving and in finding solutions to make sure these amazingly valuable, wonderful educators and human beings stay in our profession. There's a strategy. There are strategies to make this possible, and they will talk about this. So thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Amy, for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having us, Randy.
So
Thanks, Randy.
let me ask both of you the kind of the first question, which is, we had this was a long process. And there was an initial poll, and there was professional development that fed off the poll, and then we had other results as well. But let me ask you, did anything surprise you in any period of this process? Was there anything that surprised you about all the things that, was there anything that surprised you?
Thanks again, Randy. I just want a little minor correction. I'm actually from Cleveland, not Chicago. My Cleveland people probably wouldn't have been happy if I didn't correct that. So I think for me,
I have Chicago on the mind because that's where I'm going tomorrow. So my apologies.
Got it.
I know. My apologies.
No problem. I think that as a positive surprise, the results of the survey following the program was the reduction in emotional exhaustion in participants after some period of time. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that. Because we know that immediately after like a professional development session, you may feel the inspiration, you want to implement things, and then over time it can be challenging to actually put that into action. So with the program results finding that there was some sustained benefit for educators from the program, I found that to be quite important. I would say a surprise that I was sad to see was the fact that the more educators' years of experience, the more dissatisfied they are with the administration. There's more of a disconnect. And so I found that to be quite impactful, that the more skilled you feel and the more capable you feel within your own skill level, you actually get more disconnected from the leadership and the system around you. So to me, that really informs what some of the work around this should be.
Were you skeptical? Wait, before you, Tyler, I just want to ask Amy one more question. Mm-hmm. Because the Cleveland, what's been amazing, Tyler, is that you really created trust with our affiliates for them to really, walk into this process open-minded and, with a real embrace. But Amy, let me just ask you one more question. Were you skeptical that this would work?
I was
Yeah.
I was skeptical. I believed that at the beginning that people were going to be interested in it, and that sounds good. But I was skeptical. Again, these were volunteers, people who wanted to do it, so there is that side of it. But I was not sure about the impact, but I was really pleasantly surprised at the end. 'Cause, I mean, I was watching the surveys within our group and watching, popping around the groups, the participations, how actively engaged they were and how genuinely engaged. They were participating, they were making connections, they were talking with each other. So I was somewhat skeptical, but I was pleasantly surprised at the end.
Great. Now, Tyler, you really were the architect of this, and I'm really grateful about all that you did, and you really made us be patient about actually doing this work. So, anything surprised you about all this?
Well, nice of you to say. I had a great team that I did this work with. I think one of the big ideas behind Educators Thriving is that there are predictable personal challenges that educators face. We know that educators all the time feel overwhelmed. They aren't able to take care of themselves in the ways that they want. They feel isolated and so on and so forth. And it's surprising to me that as a sector, we haven't recognized that people face predictable personal challenges, and yet we haven't supplemented our professional development with personal development. We haven't systematically equipped educators to overcome these predictable personal challenges. And that just feels silly that we know people face these challenges and we don't do more to help them overcome them. And so that's kind of one of the big ideas. But, we did this. We had 222 educators who took part in the professional learning series and 7 locals across the country. And to your point from the beginning of the podcast, that over 90% of participants agreed that the program made their job feel more sustainable. I mean, that's a little bit of like a stretch item. Like your whole job feels more sustainable by virtue of going through these programs. And I think that was surprising in a really encouraging way. And also, frankly, I think it should be galvanizing to us. So we actually can equip educators with knowledge, skills, and strategies that are empirically proven to increase well-being, and that can enable them to experience their job as more sustainable. So I think that was one thing that was surprising. I think there's a data point that it was particularly sobering to me. 47% of people agreed with this statement. My administrator takes my concerns seriously. So less than half of people feel like their administrator takes their concerns seriously. I think that as a society, we systematically neglect the experience that educators are having. Basically, the main way we do, if you're at a tech company, you're getting a pulse survey every 10 minutes about like, how you doing? How can we make your experience better? In education, we look at the lagging indicator of people leaving the building and leaving the profession. And we need to be more attentive. We need to listen more carefully to educators. We need to equip administrators to do that more effectively. And so I think that's a driving motivation as we think about where we go from here.
I wanted to just jump in, and one of the most impactful aspects of the program is how it starts off, and it is about thriving. It's not just about maintaining baseline. And I think speaking to what we're saying is it's almost like for educators, well, being like plateaued at kind of like the baseline is that should be our good, like, and then maybe expected to be even suffering a little bit, but to actually thrive and to actually be in a positive, like that was refreshing to hear and just uniquely impactful for compared to what we normally hear. It's almost like we have a little bit of martyrdom is almost expected with the role. And this framework really was a new horizon.
So how did we get there? Like, how did we create that? Because in listening to them at the end, people were really proud of themselves. And I heard people talk about, you have to listen to each other. You have to have deep respect. You have to be curious. You have to be interested. You can't just, and Amy, you said it about the martyrdom, teachers will just do it all. or, whatever, the administrators will say whatever, and we'll have to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Something changed in the professional development process. That's what surprised me. So, Tyler, both of you, what do you think happened? What do you think changed? You think it was just self-selection of groups that wanted to change, got together and did this, but something changed?
Yeah, I think there are three elements that need to be true for this work to happen well. I think first, especially in this well-being world where sometimes things can be a little fuzzy, we need to be really rigorous
you said that,
about
not me.
We need to be really rigorous about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the first element that needs to be true, I think, is every learning experience needs to be research-based. So that's why in every session, we share about the literal studies that underpin the rationale for us doing that session. I think that's important because it honors the intellect of the educator. And I think it's also important because when you understand the mechanism by which something leads to higher degrees of well-being, you can more nimbly incorporate that into your life. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that all the professional learning experiences were recognized in some way. It's so often I find like well-being work happens where someone sends out a PDF and they're like, here are some strategies that you should try on your non-existent free time. Do this mindfulness thing, do this other relaxation technique, but we don't give any systemic reinforcement for participation in that. And so thanks to the philanthropic support that we had, we were able to give every educator who took part in this program $500 for taking part. We were able to provide a systemic reinforcement. And other places where we do this work, people give, units for salary advancement. People give, make it part of the professional learning time that teachers are already expected to engage in. But the point is we need to incorporate this into our systems and recognize it. And then the third feature is that it's relational. We fundamentally believe that that personal development happens interpersonally. Like, I don't know about y'all. I don't finish Coursera courses. I've started like 3 of them. I try to finish them, but I don't finish them. Like,
Yeah.
It is when I'm engaging in development experiences with and alongside a group of people with whom I can be real and authentic, that's when I make the growth. So I think that the focus on research, the fact that it was recognized, and the relational nature of the learning experiences are what enabled it to be as effective as it was. But Amy, I'm curious to hear your take.
I love everything you just said. That fit perfectly in the categories, and I think just to kind of reinforce some of that, I believe that the participants were happy to see the scientific nature of a lot of the work. So a few people had mentioned, I wasn't sure if it was going to be touchy-feely, we're going to feel better kind of professional development. It was intriguing to them, but they just weren't sure. But the fact that it was research-based, that there were actual strategies, was very, it allowed for just a different level of participation and engagement. And I agree 100% with the relational piece too. We know the Surgeon General just recently announced that loneliness is an epidemic. And I think that ties into this as well, because educators, as a school psychologist, I actually work with a lot of people on the regular basis. I work with adults all the time, but I sometimes don't realize how infrequent the adults that are in the building really do work with each other. We pass each other in the hallway, we say hello, there's different levels of interaction, but it's not necessarily always on a deep enough level that allows us to connect. So you can almost be lonely even when you're in a whole building full of people, but you're not having that deeper level connection. And this type of program did allow for that, where people could focus on themselves, focus on their needs, hear each other, listen. I mean, that was a big part of the small group work, was listening and reflecting and kind of practicing those skills throughout all of the different session topics. So I think that met that need. And when you are feeling connected, you are more likely to receive the information and be able to do something with it.
It has always struck me, Amy, the need that every school has to have an on-staff psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker. It's so great to have you on the podcast, kind of helping translate for us some of these needs and doing it in, plain English so we can understand you. I just really wanted to say, as you said that, like, oh, wow, that is exactly right. But think about if we had these resources in schools all the time, it could help, because loneliness is really a thing. And it was before the epidemic. But the epidemic, one of the worst things about the epidemic is it fractured so many of the kind of ongoing relationships and ongoing things we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going to school to, playing soccer, or to all the events that we had in faith communities and all this other stuff. And so that on top of the social media, how do we rebuild them in a way that's intentional and kind of have the muscle to rebuild? And you were doing all this work as we're in the middle of all of that at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So I just really want to say thank you for the work you do. Tyler, you just, you use the terms like mindfulness. There's another term that sometimes gets giggled about, even though it shouldn't be, difficult conversations. I mean, we all have to learn how to have difficult conversations. That's like the part of life. And I often think, people laugh about it because they don't actually know how to do it in a way, and I mean, I'm a big avoider too, but it's, we don't want to do it.
It's hard.
But you teach people the strategies for mindfulness and for difficult conversations. And so how did we go? Like, how did you figure out the line between therapy and professional development? Like, how were you able to kind of get through all of this? I'm sure there was an overlap, but both of you are very versed in both. How did we navigate through all this?
Yeah. In 1999, Marty Seligman was the president of the American Psychological Association, and he coined the term positive psychology. And the idea behind it was that we had spent the majority of the history of the field of psychology studying how to take people from -10 to 0, from clinically depressed, from clinically anxious to okay. And the idea behind positive psychology is that we should apply the same level of empirical rigor to understanding how to take people from 0 to 10. How to take people who are not necessarily clinically depressed, but who are okay, to actually flourishing. How do we facilitate human flourishing? And what do we know empirically leads to higher degrees of well-being? And so over the last 24 years, we've learned a lot from the field of positive psychology about strategies that are empirically proven to increase well-being. But what we haven't done is incorporate that into our schools and our school systems. And we were talking about it earlier. When we know that educators face personal challenges, it is silly that we are not supplementing our professional development with personal development. And so to your question, we talk about, is this therapy? How is this not therapy? How do we talk about these issues? One of the things that we say in the first session every single time is that therapy is a thing and this is not that. And Amy and I were actually talking before the podcast. Basically, every school district in the country has some kind of EAP program to give people access to support if they have the -10 to 0 challenges. And we know that if we're going to reach the heights of our potential as a country, if we're going to enable our kids to reach the heights of their potential, we have to do the 0 to 10 stuff. We can't be just muddling along and being okay and expect to reach the heights of our collective potential for our kids, for our educators. And so I think it's we draw a clear line between therapy and personal development. That this is an example of personal development and not therapy, and that we point people in every single program towards those supports should they need to access them. And then we give people an opportunity to really think about these 0 to 10 strategies that we know lead to higher degrees of well-being.
Yeah, that fits really much with what we're doing in Cleveland as we're trying to conceptualize and prioritize adult wellness, adult social emotional learning is really having like a tiered approach. So some of these concepts, the delivery can kind of be the difference between is it therapy or is it strategy or how are we using it? So the idea is you share effective strategies, make it available for everyone, and you're going to catch many people who need it and can take it and run with it on their own and have a use, and they don't necessarily need a lot more support, maybe minimal. Then you may have some people who do need more. You need more targeted intervention, and then all the way up to the therapeutic side, the highest level, which could come in a variety of different ways. So, and I just agree, like these skills are. I'm a school psychologist, so I'm very pro therapy and very pro mental health services, but I also know generalization and application of the strategies are what sustains. And so the more that the culture can adopt those concepts, the more effective people are going to be at utilizing them and not just feeling like it's me that I have to do this by myself. It's considered, more of a community-based approach.
What do you think we should be doing now? Like, how should we take this report? What do we do with it? What would we do with it, for example, Amy, in your district? And Tyler, what do you think we should be doing with it more broadly?
Well, I see the value in the survey alone and starting with the information and the data, but that's genuine. We're, in our school district, we're right now adjusting through new administration. And so this is like in real time of, what do we need? What are we doing? How are we working together? And trying to have a systematic way to measure, not in a cold mechanical sense, but in a what's really going on? How can we authentically get information to push us forward? So, because not everybody needs the same thing. I mean, we want to hear, what is happening in whatever certain areas to try to use that data. So I could see using some of the survey information to get a baseline and to really direct what are the key issues and then to create some systematic change with that. We're talking about the personal side, and that is very important. And then we have the systemic side. So how do we use that in both avenues? We were talking earlier with the podcast before the podcast started as well about, wanting to not overemphasize resilience of individuals, but to do the systemic piece. And that I think working together to take that information between systems, administration, educators, and all the departments too, not just teachers or even just, the people in the classroom, but all of our staff. This is really widespread. Like, we need to be looking ecologically at how the systems are working together and have all the stakeholders heard. I think that to me would be one of the most powerful. Let's hear from everybody and what the needs are.
Right.
I love that. Yeah, I think at the highest level, in terms of where we go from here, we as a society, I think, and as an education sector, don't really have a real sense of possibility that we can improve educator well-being at scale. I think we collectively kind of think that burnout and attrition are somewhat inevitable. And I think what's important about the work that we had the chance to do together is we've shown that actually isn't necessarily the case. Is this work always going to be really hard? Yes. Is it inevitable that we are going to have educators burning out? Not at all. And that with the right strategic investment of resources, with the right set of actions, we can improve educator well-being. And so I think we just need to get that into our bones as educators and as a society and as a sector, that we can make progress. I think part of that involves sharing about this work more broadly. But I think that's the kind of fundamental point we've got to keep in mind moving forward.
So we got to share. So what I'm hearing both of you say is we have to find ways to share this work more broadly. And it's interesting. I think the press is burnt out on telling stories about, burnout, because this is such a good news story.
Yeah.
And it's gotten not a lot of traction And, so we have to actually figure out ways to communicate better, but we need to get the study out, the results out to show possibility. And then I think that the first point that Amy, you said as well, was you just got to start and you got to know what the issues are. And by doing that first survey document, it basically debunks a myth that nobody cares about what teachers think.
Absolutely.
And so that first survey document really needs to happen, and that we now know we can actually have strategies that work. And they're basically make people have to be heard, and they have to believe that the issues that they raise are going to be addressed. And I think that's part of the community building that you both did, as well as several of our other affiliates. So it taught me a lot. Let me just say this: I was skeptical that we could actually fix this, and both of you and our other affiliates taught me a lot about this.
I really appreciate what you were saying about like almost the burnout on the burnout now. It's we need to change the narrative a bit and get inspired and be thinking that there are ways to change, and that you almost, I don't want to go so far as to say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because I don't want to negate the realities, but I also know that mentality and framework, that how we think matters. And if we're not careful, we can move ourselves away from the positive growth. I would like to really be promoting that narrative and inspire the positive and build the positive momentum. And I want to do that very carefully because I don't want to, like I said, want to be minimizing anyone's struggles or the challenges, but we don't want to wallow in them either. We want to work together to really bring optimism with the realism to change. And I think just this kind of work, I'm very excited at the attention that mental health is getting more. I will say that's one positive. So what are we going to do about it? Like, how do we work together, and how do we use what strategies we know are effective and can work, and maybe start talking about those testimonials, those examples, to give hope and to give some examples.
Yeah, I think my closing thought, so my teammates, Laura and Hallie, and there are other people on our research team, are the people who generated this educator-created definition and survey measure of well-being. People should Google Beyond Burnout, AFT, and download the report. You go to page 10 of the report and you can see this survey measure. The really quick story of this was that AFT said, we know burnout is all over the place, but we want to understand what thriving is. We want to understand what flourishing is. So we had 70 hours of focus groups with educators across the country. Ask them not what does burnout, but what does well-being look like to you? We created 500 survey items, which ain't no one want to take a 500-item survey. That is antithetical to well-being. So we went back to them and they narrowed it down from 500 to 120, then down to 84 items. And then we had 1,300 educators across the country take this 84-item survey, which is, by the way, still long, that also included other validated scales. And then the research team did this thing called exploratory factor analysis to identify the 26 items that are most predictive of well-being and the 6 factors that most predict educator well-being. And so I think that what we need to do fundamentally is listen first. We need to listen first, and we need to listen well, and we need to listen for the things that we know are predictive of well-being. And what we found is that those 26 items that people can see on page 10 of this report are the items that correlated with the other validated scales of well-being. And so I think we need to be really thoughtful when we listen to educators. What questions are we asking so we can be strategic in the support that we subsequently provide? So may we listen well.
Well, I would just say thank you to both of you. And I think both of you, Amy and Tyler, have done a lot of teaching of us tonight. And I really, really appreciate it. And I want to say to everybody, Tyler just told you, if you want to learn more about the Beyond Burnout report, go to aft.org/beyond burnout. You can look at page 10 and all the other pages as well. But all of this is a way of showing that how we're trying to keep teachers in the profession, how we're trying to create agency, how we're trying to lift everyone up, how we're trying to address real solutions for kids, address loneliness, address learning loss, do that kind of work. And this work that we've done in terms of addressing burnout is a real good way of doing that. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for listening. And we'll see you again at Union Talk.
Thanks,
Thanks, Randi.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.